Hello, Grand Rising, everyone. Thanks for tuning in once again to the original Queen Ahmadiyyah Shakur show. I'm your host, Queen Ahmadiyyah Shakur, and this is your Sunday Vitamins. Okay, so let's get into it because I was sent this very upsetting story, and this actually was reported 2 days ago, where some New York correctional officers just beat, kicked, punched, and just brutalized this man in the most vicious fashion. And this man was handcuffed the entire time. Okay, so let's talk about it. Please be sure to like the video. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Dr._A_Shakur, TikTok at Dr. A Shakur, and Twitter at DGoddess27. New York correctional officers pummeled handcuffed prisoner before death, according to a video. So, newly released video of a fatal New York prison beating shows correctional officers repeatedly pummeling a handcuffed inmate, striking him in the chest with a shoe, and lifting him by his neck before dropping him. Body worn camera footage of the December 9th assault on Robert Brooks was made public Friday by the state's attorney general, who is investigating the officer's use of force. Now, Brooks, who was 43, was pronounced deceased at the hospital the morning after the assault at the Marcy Correctional Facility, which is a state prison in Oneida County. 13 correctional officers and a nurse implicated in the attack will face termination, according to New York Governor Kathy Hochul, okay, who said that she was outraged and horrified by the video of the senseless killing. Let me tell you all something. First of all, the nurse stood there and watched, didn't do anything to intervene. Now, this is all according from reports and also what can be seen on the body camera footage. So, the footage made public Friday shows correctional officers repeatedly punching Brooks in the face and groin as he sits handcuffed on a medical examination table. Now, I want you to think about that because if he was already sitting on a medical examination table, there was already a nurse present in the room. That says that there was already something physically wrong with this man, that he was already likely sick or suffering from something, but they're going to beat him, 13 grown men, while he's handcuffed, and they stomped and kicked this man. Okay, I'm not gonna, I'll show a blurred out version of the video that they showed on a news report, but also I took some still shots of it. It is absolutely just ridiculous and so heinous. And to think that Trump wants people to lose the ability to sue these nefarious police officers, okay, so they can just do these things and get off, get away with it scot free. Please pay attention. Now, these videos are shocking and disturbing, and I advise all to take appropriate care before choosing to watch them. Now, this is what New York Attorney General Letitia James said. Now, I'm not going to show other videos. I'm just simply going to show, like I said, a brief clip where they have much of it blurred out that they showed on the news. Because if you go on the website, on Letitia James's website, they have like multiple clips, okay? And that I didn't even bother to watch, by the way, because I'm sure it's very triggering. Now, the final results of Brooks's autopsy are still pending. Preliminary findings from a medical examination indicate concern for asphyxia due to compression of the neck as the cause of death, as well as death being due to actions of another, according to court filings. This is a darn shame. Absolutely a shame. And this is where he was on the medical examination table. Now you can see this officer right here. You can see his leg like thrown up there as because he was kicking him. Okay, that's what he was doing. Now you see two others. You see several of them holding him down. The two in the front look like they possibly have him by his throat. And then you see him going in, kicking him again. He rears back to kick him even harder from the looks of this still. This is all so heinous. I mean, what kind of depraved minds? And this is absolutely, they show this man no mercy whatsoever. I mean, you have to be an animal to behave that way. Now, the video does not include audio because the body cameras had not been activated by the officers wearing them. James said that her office was investigating the use of force that led to Brooks's death, but did not say whether any of the officers would be charged with crimes. Well, that's the thing. At the end of the day, what's the purpose of the investigation? Just to get them fired? They need to be in jail. Okay, they need to be arrested and charged. Now, it goes on to say With the release of the videos, members of the public can now view for themselves the horrific and extreme nature of the deadly attack on Robert L. Brooks. Okay, this is what an attorney for the family by the name of Elizabeth Measure said. Saying that as viewers can see, Mr. Brooks was fatally, violently beaten by a group of officers whose job was to keep him safe. He deserved to live, and everyone else living in Marcy Correctional Facility deserves to know they do not have to live in fear of violence at the hands of prison staff. Now, the Union for State Correctional Officers, which viewed footage of the assault before its public release, they said in a statement, what we witnessed is incomprehensible, to say the least, and it certainly does not reflect the great work that the vast majority of our membership conducts every day. I mean, just look at it. He was absolutely doing the most. Now, this incident not only endangers our entire membership, but undermines the integrity of our profession. We cannot and will not condone this behavior. Now, this is what the union, the New York State Correctional of the New York State Correctional Officers and Police Benevolent Association said. Brooks had been serving a 12-year prison sentence for first-degree assault since 2017. He had arrived at Marcy Correctional Facility only hours before the beating. Hadn't been there but a few hours. Okay, and this was after he was transferred from another nearby state prison, according to officials. Now, Marcy is about 200 miles northwest of New York City, between the cities of Rome and Utica. The Correctional Association of New York, a prison oversight group, said they had documented reports of pervasive brutality and racism inside the Marcy Correctional Facility during a monitoring visit 2 years ago. But see, please pay attention, because in that statement, didn't they say that they won't tolerate this sort of behavior? But clearly they've been tolerating it. Okay, please pay attention. Now, Tina Luongo, a chief attorney at the Legal Aid Society in New York City, called for complete transparency on state correctional staff's use of force and a full accounting of this tragedy, saying that, like everyone who has seen this video, we're horrified, angered, and deeply saddened. And she called the assault on Brooks a grotesque display of inhumanity that is utterly appalling. It absolutely is. Okay, it absolutely is. This is something that you would have expected to see in prehistoric times, okay, amongst the uncivilized, not people who are currently walking around in a civilized society. Okay, this is also grotesque and clearly demented. Now, too often, the violence that occurs behind prison walls remains hidden or becomes normalized in the public eye once the headlines fade. This is what Luongo said, whose organization provides public defender services and has clients in state prisons. Absolutely egregious. Absolutely egregious. I mean, and here's the thing: three out of the 13 people who were involved in this, oh, well, they've done this before. You see, this wasn't their first time at the rodeo. Okay. I found a report that says three of the 13 guards implicated in the savage beating of Robert Brooks have been accused in lawsuits of earlier attacks in New York prisons. But they still kept their jobs. Okay. They still were able to work. They didn't get any charges. They weren't convicted of anything, clearly. So, at least three of the New York prison guards implicated in the savage beating death of a handcuffed man have been accused of participating in similar attacks on prisoners across the state. Two of the corrections officers and a sergeant accused in the death of Robert Brooks, an inmate at the Marcy Correctional Facility in central New York, were previously named in federal lawsuits filed by prisoners accusing them of brutal attacks that left one man disfigured and another in a wheelchair. Are y'all hearing this? This is absolutely heinous. Now, a lawyer for one of the injured men drew a line from the earlier accusations of violence to attack this month, or to the attack this month, saying that the fact that they failed to rein in these officers that they knew had beaten someone else in a direct contributor, okay, that is a direct contributor to Mr. Brooks's death. Now, this is what Katie Rosenfeld, an attorney, said. She also criticized the New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision for fighting her client's lawsuit for 4 years. But again, let me reiterate how they send out this statement saying that they will not tolerate, they do not condone this sort of behavior. It's inhumane, but yet it continues to fester. Are we supposed to believe that they're actively trying to do anything to stop it? Because according to Katie Rosenfeld, they're actually sitting here fighting the case that these other inmates had. They've been fighting her client's case specifically for 4 years. Now, Letitia James, the state attorney general, on Friday released video footage of guards beating Mr. Brooks in a prison infirmary on December 9th. The footage captured on body cameras worn by four of the officers, it showed the guards punching, kicking, and choking Mr. Brooks over roughly 20 minutes. Now, in a swift and rare rebuke of the guards' actions, Daniel F. Marticello III, the state's corrections commissioner, vowed to address a culture of brutality that has long permeated the state's prison system. Okay, yeah, this is absolutely the culture. Okay, this has been going on for decades. As I told you all before when we talked about the cases of uh, former sheriff Alex Villanueva, who allowed them to have gangs, okay, at his sheriff's office. That had been going on for decades, literally. Now, they go on to say it's not enough to simply condemn this horrific act and then go back to business. This is what he said in a statement on Friday, saying institutional change must follow. And you see, that's the problem. When these things happen, there's not really anything done about it. They come out and they say what they think that the public wants to hear. Okay, they try to act as though they're being transparent when they release the body cam footage and they give a few statements or whatever. And that's just the end of it. And it goes back to business as usual. That's exactly what happens. This is why it has continued to fester for decades. Now, a spokesman for the corrections department, when asked about earlier allegations against the officers and why the department had not acted sooner to address them, actually declined to comment, citing the pending investigations. Now, that's just a load of BS. This is what they say when they don't want to go into the depths of details about things that have occurred. They just don't want to talk about it. But, they still at the same time want us to think that they're actually being transparent. Please pay attention. So, Governor Kathy Hochul said last weekend that she was moving to fire the 13 guards and a prison nurse who had been implicated in the attack. Now, in the videos released on Friday, Mr. Brooks is seen lying on the ground outside the prison with his hands cuffed behind his back. He appears to have already been beaten. Now, that explains why he was on the medical table, because they beat this man before he even came inside the prison when he was being transferred. Okay, he was beaten during transit, apparently lying on the ground outside of the prison, handcuffed, couldn't defend himself. They couldn't even say he was resisting, because how do you, in fact, resist when your hands are bound behind your back? Okay, please make that make sense. Now, the officers pick him up by his cuffed hands and hold his feet. Once inside the infirmary, officers toss him onto a gurney and take turns punching him in the head, slamming a shoe against his chest, and kicking him near his privates. Now, here's the thing. One of the reports said that they have not figured out what the motive is for the attack. Well, as far as I'm concerned, does the motive even matter? I mean, what kind of justification could they even give? The man was handcuffed. He wasn't fighting them. What did he do to them to deserve any of this? I'm sure nothing. So I don't really care about the motive. I want consequences for their nefarious, depraved actions. Okay, now at one point, an officer with his hand gripped around Mr. Brooks's neck pulls him up into a seated position and repeatedly lifts him up by his throat. When he appears to be unresponsive, an officer gives Mr. Brooks a sternum rub, pressing a knuckled fist on his chest in a painful technique used by emergency service workers to try to revive unresponsive patients. I mean, just devilish. Now, the video shows some officers walking in and out of the room, milling about in the hallway, or looking on from the doorway, probably keeping watch, okay, to see if anybody that may tell on them is coming. Now, some of those assaulting Mr. Brooks paused to change their gloves or to wash their hands. Oh, so they took a break, changed up their gear, and then continued. Okay, please pay attention. They say this kind of looks like another day in the office. Now, this is what Jennifer Scaife, the executive director of Correctional Association of New York, a prison watchdog agency. She says these kinds of things don't just bubble up out of nowhere. They absolutely don't, especially when you have more than 10 people involved. And then you have a nurse who's sitting there, standing idly by, not protesting, not saying, hey, stop, get off of him. What are you guys doing? Not saying or doing anything, just writing on her little clipboard, jotting down notes as if there's nothing going wrong. So years earlier, some of the same guards had meted out brutal punishment against prisoners without provocation. You see, and that's likely what happened in this case. And that's why I don't care what the motive is. Why do we need to know a motive? Okay, just deal with them. They need to be held accountable. Now, according to a series of lawsuits that describe assaults by the correction staff in glaringly similar detail. Now, in February of 2020, Adam Bauer was a year out of his release date, okay, or year from his release date, when corrections officers beat him in a bathroom at the Marcy prison and then accused him of attacking them. Nicholas Azzaloni, one of the officers accused in the assault of Mr. Brooks, joined with other officers in the attack on Mr. Bauer, according to the lawsuit. And on Friday, a man who answered a phone belonging to Mr. Azzaloni, a corrections officer who joined the department in 2007, well, he declined to comment. They say they knew about Nicholas Azzaloni for many years and they did nothing. That's what Rosenfeld, Mr. Bauer's attorney, said. Mr. Bauer said he was exiting a bathroom stall and about to light a cigarette with a battery when a guard stopped him and asked what he was doing. The officer ordered Mr. Bauer to stand against the wall for a frisk. After a few pats, the officer began punching him in the head until he fell to the floor and then kicked him. Two sergeants and Mr. Azzaloni joined in, including one sergeant who slammed a clipboard against Mr. Bauer's head so hard that the metal clasp tore a hole in his scalp. Now, think about that. We've all seen a clipboard. Now, can you imagine what amount of brutal force had to have been enacted for that to happen? The metal part on the clipboard, that is absolutely crazy. So hard that the metal clasp tore a hole in this man's scalp. Now, the guards then dragged him out of the prison, put him in a van, and drove him to the infirmary. Once there, he was forced to lie face down on the floor as Mr. Azzaloni kicked his feet. Photos of Mr. Bauer showed him dazed, topless, and wearing only red shorts while seated on a gurney in the infirmary. Blood splattered on the floor and dripped down his face from two gashes on his forehead. And I'm sitting here looking at this picture of this man. It looks absolutely awful. He says, I was scared to death. I'm sure he was. Mr. Bauer, who's now 50, said in a phone interview on Friday, I really truly thought they were going to kill me. Well, it looks like they darn sure tried. It looks like they definitely tried. Now, to cover up the assault, according to the lawsuit, well, of course, they did what they do best. They lied. Okay, they told a nurse that he had harmed himself. They took him to a nearby hospital and then told medical staff that was there that he had been attacked by another prisoner. That's the lie they told. Now, one corrections employee told hospital workers that Mr. Bauer's injuries were from a seat belt. When Mr. Bauer was returned to the prison, he was thrown into solitary confinement on false disciplinary charges for 60 days until a prison official reversed the decision. Wow. This is absolutely deplorable. Now, the Corrections Department's Office of Special Investigations looked into the allegations against the guards, and they ultimately found that the force was necessary and reasonable to get Mr. Bauer to comply. Do y'all hear this? Are y'all hearing this? I mean, the lies that they tell and get away with, and then the people that are the higher ups just go along with it and then justify the foolishness, the brutality of it all. The officers, she said, were never interviewed by investigators. So they didn't even look into this. They just took them at their word, even though this man was bloody, leaking, a hole in his head. Now, that same year in September, two other guards now implicated in the beating of Mr. Brooks, Sergeant Glenn Trombley and Officer Anthony Farina, participated in an assault on a prisoner named William Alvarez. Now, Mr. Alvarez was cleaning the bathroom shower area when an officer pepper sprayed him without provocation, according to his lawsuit. Mr. Alvarez ran out into the main dorm area in sight of other officers. Okay, but the officer ordered him into a vestibule. Now, as he stood with his hands on the wall, Mr. Alvarez said in his lawsuit, the officer slammed his head repeatedly against it and then cuffed him. Mr. Trombley and Mr. Farina arrived, and together the three officers kicked him in the head and body before dragging him into a van and taking him to the infirmary. The attack continued in the van, with Mr. Farina and Mr. Trombley looking on as another officer punched him over and over again until the van pulled up to the infirmary, and Mr. Trombley said, "That's enough." Mr. Alvarez, who said in the lawsuit that he is now permanently disfigured, required facial surgery. This is so darn. You know what? This man was likely a handsome man, and they were probably jealous and hating. Now, I don't know that to be the case, but that's probably the case. They beat that man's face in to the point that he required facial surgery. Darn devils. Now, like Mr. Bauer, Mr. Alvarez was accused of attacking the guards and held in solitary confinement for 60 days. Lawyers for Mr. Alvarez in the lawsuit described the attack on their client as intentional, sadistic, and malicious. Mr. Trombley and Mr. Farina did not respond to requests for comment. Now, before Mr. Trombley was moved to the prison in Marcy, New York, he worked at the Greenhaven Correctional Facility in Stormville, New York, where three prisoners accused him of beating them. So he's just going from one facility to the next, just carrying out heinous actions. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about his record. Nobody's conducting investigations into this devil. Certainly, he's not getting any consequences whatsoever. Now, during a frisk in June of 2013, Ernest Iverson said Mr. Trombley, who was an officer at the time, whispered, "I hear you like to sue people," before placing him in a headlock. He then lifted Mr. Iverson off the floor, swung him back and forth by his neck, and struck him in his back, according to court testimony. Mr. Iverson said he planted a weapon on him. Mr. Trombley denied the allegations, of course, and said that the only force he used was to place Mr. Iverson in handcuffs. He testified that he discovered the weapon on Mr. Iverson during the search. A jury sided with the officers. A month later, a similar story emerged from another prisoner. Rendell Robinson accused Mr. Trombley of forcing him to strip naked during a frisk and said he and another officer took turns punching him in the face, according to the lawsuit. Mr. Robinson had a concussion and a fractured nose. I mean, they are just out here brutalizing people. This is what these devils are out here doing. Now, look at this picture right here, because that's Mr. Robert Brooks after they finished with him. Look how limp his body is. And I'm not sure if this is before or after, because this could actually be from when they carried him in from outside, because they'd already brutalized him before he even made it into the infirmary. I mean, but just look at that. Absolutely egregious. This is all so sick. So anyway, this other man says he suffered a concussion and a fractured nose. Said, "I really began to fear for my life at this point because they would not let go of me." In 2015, another man, Erquan White, accused Mr. Trombley and several other officers of viciously attacking him in an empty classroom, pulling his legs in opposite directions, stomping on his testicles, and striking the bottom of his feet with a baton. They are in here torturing people. This is what they're doing. I mean, what does this sound like? This doesn't sound like some of the things that they did to your ancestors, okay, back during slavery, because that's exactly what it sounds like. And mind you, they're not just doing this to people who look like me. Now, the case of Mr. Brooks was somebody, was a black man, but they've done this to other people as well, because the man who's sitting up there leaking, I'm not even going to show you that picture because it's so grotesque, but that was a Caucasian man. So they're just doing this probably to prisoners they don't like, anybody who just looks they don't like, or somebody they found out something about them. Like, for example, Trombley told one of them, "I heard you like to sue people." So, just finding whatever reason they want to go in on these people. This is all real crazy. So, In his lawsuit, Mr. White says the officers immediately after the attack talked about what to say in department reports. He said he was placed in solitary confinement, and while there, he said in the lawsuit he began urinating blood and required the use of a wheelchair. Oh my God, absolutely egregious that they do people this way. Now, on Tuesday, before the videos of Mr. Brooks's final moments were released publicly, the state police filed applications seeking so-called red flag orders for Officer Azzaloni and two other officers implicated in the fatal attack, Matthew Gallagher and Robert Kessler. Such orders allow law enforcement authorities to remove guns from people believed to be a potential threat to themselves or others. A judge in Oneida County rejected the applications but ordered the state police to conduct background checks on the officers and scheduled a hearing on the matter for January the 7th. This is absolutely egregious, okay? Absolutely nefarious. I mean, the fact that they have been doing this stuff and getting away with it for so long, and then beating someone on the bottom of their feet with a baton, kicking and stomping, picking people up by their necks, just torturous things that they're doing to these people. This is all real crazy. And at the end of the day, you know, one of these at least was a higher ranking officer. And they've been doing this for decades. Like I said, this is all real sick. Everyone, please like and share. Please don't forget to like and share. Okay, it's the least you can do for the Queen's hard work. Oh, wow. This is a lot. Now, with that all being said, I'm going to go to a news report. Just a brief clip, and they'll show a clip of one of the videos, but they have it blurred. Okay, here we go. I'm going to share my screen. This is absolutely nefarious at the end of the day. I mean, they act as though prisoners don't have rights. These people are still human beings.
Back here in the U.S., new video released just hours ago showing the disturbing beating of a New York inmate. Robert Brooks was handcuffed when the incident took place earlier this month. The New York State Attorney General is now investigating. We want to warn you, this video is disturbing. Here's ABC's Morgan Norwood.
Tonight, disturbing police body camera video shows corrections officers at an upstate New York prison beating a handcuffed inmate for 15 minutes, the day he was transferred into their facility. In the video from multiple body cameras released today by New York State Attorney General Letitia James, you can see officers choking, punching, and kicking 43-year-old Robert Brooks in the face, torso, and genitals on December 9th, as two sergeants and a nurse simply watch and never intervene, according to a deposition by an investigator.
As Attorney General, you have my word that we will use every possible tool available to us to investigate this death thoroughly and swiftly.
It happened at the Marcy Correctional Facility in Utica, about 50 miles east of Syracuse. Brooks was pronounced dead the next day at a nearby hospital. A preliminary autopsy ruling Brooks' death a homicide caused by asphyxia due to neck compression. New York Governor Kathy Hochul ordering the termination of 14 prison staffers, including bystanders. Brooks was serving a 12-year prison sentence for stabbing his girlfriend in 2017. An attorney for his family telling ABC News in part, Mr. Brooks was fatally, violently beaten by a group of officers whose job was to keep him safe. He deserved to live.
And tonight, the family attorney also saying the motive for this case is unclear. In fact, she calls it incomprehensible.
Morgan Norwood with those late developments. Thank you.
Okay, absolutely a darn shame at the end of the day. And you know, Letitia James is talking all tough about how they're going to investigate it, this, that, and the third. Listen, this isn't her first time at the rodeo. These things, as I told you, have been continuing to go on. They've been festering. Now she's coming out saying they're going to do all this and that. Why haven't they done anything in the past? What's the holdup? That's what I'd like to know. Okay, what's the holdup? But you know, let's talk about Trump, because why has qualified immunity excused officers' misconduct for all these decades? Okay, that's what I want to know. The Supreme Court's reaffirmation in July that a sitting president cannot be criminally charged for actions within their constitutional authority doesn't concern legal experts, apparently. Okay, I guess that doesn't matter to them. Anybody who's out here committing crimes should have to face consequences. I don't care who you are or what your position is. All right? I absolutely do not care. You should get the same punishment as everybody else, presidents included. Now, the movement to increase accountability for police officers who use excessive force may have seen its most significant setback yet with the second election of Donald Trump as president. Now, Trump has promised the nation's police officers that he will grant them immunity from prosecution, a move that legal experts say would deal a severe blow to efforts to prosecute law enforcement officers accused of harming suspects while in custody. Now, jurisdictions across the nation began revisiting their policies for handling police misconduct after the death of George Floyd, the Minneapolis man who was murdered by police after being accused of using counterfeit money, which, by the way, that was a false allegation. The money wasn't even fake. Now, even before Trump's election, the widespread self-examination of handling of complaints by police abuse or of police abuse had begun to lose momentum. But what would protecting officers from prosecution mean? And how is it related to the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling earlier this year that found that Trump's actions as a private citizen are immune or not immune for criminal prosecution? But as president, he has absolute immunity. So, Capital B spoke with legal experts Devon Carbado and Dolores Jones Brown about the differences between qualified immunity, which police officers are typically granted as part of their investigatory powers, and absolute immunity, which the Supreme Court ruled Trump now holds. So, what is absolute immunity? There are certain customs associated with positions of authority, such as president, judge, prosecutor, law enforcement officer, or medical and emergency services professionals. These allow people in these roles to perform their duties without fear of civil, criminal, or personal consequences. And see, that's where it's all wrong. Okay, these people should be able to perform their duties, all right? And the only reason they would have a fear of being charged with anything is if they were doing something, okay? Because quite frankly, if people were to just make up things on them, I'm sure they could prove their case. I'm sure they have body cam footage, okay? They wear cameras for a reason. You see, but the thing of it is, body cam could implicate the officer, but it also could show that the officer didn't do anything. Okay, it could exclude the officer. But nefarious officers don't want to turn them on when they're up to things that they shouldn't be up to, when they're involved in criminal activity, when they're being corrupt or brutalizing someone. So at the end of the day, my thing is they just give them too many allowances. And this is why these things continue to fester, because they hardly get any consequences, if ever. And then they get slaps on the wrist when they do, in most of the cases. Now, with that all being said, these informal protections can sometimes create a sense of immunity or unchecked power, which raises concerns about accountability. However, says Jones Brown, who's a professor at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York, says if the underlying charge is one for which there is no statute of limitations or there is an expanded statute of limitations, my understanding is that the prosecution will not be precluded once that person is out of office. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court used this principle, which is not a formal law, policy, or statute, as the foundation of its ruling in July. Trump has leaned into the ruling when he swore to seek vengeance against those whom he sees as the enemy and pledges to grant police officers immunity. Prosecutors in the legal cases against Trump are responding to the rulings as well. Federal investigators have dismissed their indictment against him for interfering in the 2020 election without prejudice. Okay, they dismissed it without prejudice, leaving the door open to refile charges when he's not an elected official. But will they actually do it? I doubt it. Now, the founding fathers did not intend for a president to have absolute immunity, and that's why we have three branches of government to serve as checks and balances against one another. Trump's efforts to undo that core principle, including packing the court with conservative justices, according to Jones Brown, says this is perhaps the closest existential threat of the president being able to control the branches of government. Now, this idea that we're thinking that Trump can do whatever he wants, Trump maybe thinks he can do whatever he wants with impunity, really doesn't exist, says Jones Brown. It's one of those kind of things where he may be delaying the inevitable as opposed to getting away scot-free with behavior that would otherwise be charged as criminal to a person who was not the president. How about this? How about not letting a convicted felon be the darn president? How about that? I mean, do you all hear how stupid this is? Somebody convicted of a felon can't live in certain housing. Okay, and I'm not talking about people that are S offenders. I'm talking about regular people who just get felons for whatever reason. You can't live in certain areas or certain apartments or whatever once they find out you're a felon. You can't get certain jobs, okay? You can't go to college depending on can't get financial aid for college depending on what type of felony you have. They have all of these things that they can't do, all of these punishments, the stigma that they have to carry for the rest of their lives. But you mean to tell me you can have all of these felonies and still be the president? And then they want us to think that, well, don't worry about it. Even if the president has impunity, even if they are not going to be charged now, after he's no longer president, he could still be charged. Okay, please miss me with it. Why is he president in the first place? Okay, make that make sense because it makes none to me. It makes none whatsoever. Now, can you imagine if Obama had 34 felonies that they would have allowed him to run and win? Okay, we know that wouldn't have happened. Please. They went in on Obama if he sneezed too loud. Okay, remember how they went in on him for wearing a tan suit and it was all over the headlines as if that was some breaking news? I'm just saying. Now, qualified immunity is a judge created rule that protects government officials, including police officers, when they're sued. And this is according to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Now, the doctrine has been used in many cases to protect officers who have been accused of misconduct, including excessive use of force and fatal shootings. Yeah, specifically those carried out on people who look like me. Now, the doctrine holds that officials who violate other people's constitutional rights can only be held responsible if there exists a previous court decision with very similar facts that resulted in other officials being held accountable. Okay, so if there's a case that set precedent, basically, all right, without that, no, so they just get away with it. Several nonprofit organizations, including Black Lives Matter grassroots corporations, Black Lives Matter grassroots and corporations such as Ben and Jerry's and civil rights law firms such as LDF have joined the fight to end the legal doctrine. I don't want to hear anything about Black Lives Matter. Okay, I don't want to hear anything about Black Lives Matter. Now, shout out to Ben and Jerry's because they have been, out there fighting for the rights of people who look like me for years. All right. If y'all should be supporting Ben and Jerry's because at the end of the day, most of y'all are probably out there eating Briars. And what has Briars done for us? Nothing. I'm sorry. Please make it make sense. If you do your research, you'll find out a lot about Ben and Jerry's and their advocacy work. Now, what are the origins of qualified immunity? It's not a law, nor is it written in the U.S. Constitution. The phrase was introduced in April of 1967 by U.S. Supreme Court justices. The all-white male panel decided in Pearson v. Ray that while a group of Black and white clergymen had their civil rights violated when they were arrested by police in Jackson, Mississippi for occupying a whites-only waiting area of a bus depot, they could not sue the officers for the arrest. Now, the 8-1 vote kicked the case back to the lower court to decide whether the police officers' arrests were legal or illegal. The lone dissent, written by Justice William Douglas, noted that the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871 says that every person without exceptions who are acting under the color of law and violated the law that are held liable. Douglas also, everyone who operated under the color of law and violate the law are to be held liable. Okay, and we already know that police act under the color of law. Now, I've told you all a myriad of information about that stuff, from the Black Law Library or from the Black's Law Dictionary. Okay, I've told you so much stuff about that in the past, so maybe we'll have to revisit it at some point. Now, with that all being said, Douglas also highlighted that the Supreme Court should have made a full and not partial decision in the clergyman's case because some state courts have been instruments of suppression of civil rights and were partially responsible for the wrongs to be remedied. Now, when Douglas wrote his dissent, when he wrote it, he cited a previous case in order to make his argument. Experts say that's the key to disqualifying a police officer from qualified immunity, but it can be a tricky task. Since the court's ruling, qualified immunity has garnered definitions and synonyms such as an exception rule, legal principle, or doctrine. During the 1980s, the Supreme Court ruled on more cases that expanded qualified immunity to other law enforcement and professions, such as government officials and even school administrators. Now, how difficult is it to argue that an officer should be held accountable in a civil lawsuit? In order to, and see, this is why people need to stop going in on Benjamin Crump. Okay, stop saying that Benjamin Crump's not about justice. He's about getting the bag. At the end of the day, yeah, he is. He's getting the bag for the families of the victims. Okay, and for the victims too, the ones who survived the brutalization that has been inflicted upon them. At the end of the day, he's not a criminal defense attorney. Now, if the family wants, to pursue that, then that's up to them. But at the end of the day, sometimes that's all you can get is to hope for some sort of, civil, a civil suit so you can get compensation. Because these police, they're protected. Okay. So most of the time, they're not going to get what we want them to get. They're not going to get what they in fact deserve. And that's just what it is. Now, the law thrives on looking to the past to figure out the future. Attorneys do extensive research before filing a lawsuit to know if what happened to their client happened before, to know if their case will be successful. If a case has enough legal standing to proceed and hasn't been decided before through litigation, it can become a precedent. Now, Jones Brown says that, for example, once a police department has been put on notice that using a particular police training technique is banned and another officer uses that same technique anyway, then that officer should not then be able to take advantage of qualified immunity because the notice went to the profession. Well, they still are allowing them to do that, okay? I mean, that shouldn't be the case, but it clearly is, as far as I can see. All these things need to change because it's just all a load of BS at the end of the day. I'm not going to read all of this, but listen, the bottom line is what are the governments doing? Okay. The local governments, what are they doing? Now, I have several questions for them. So as we move in the direction of shifting the way policing operates today, all the levels of power should be used. So we shouldn't just wait on the Supreme Court. We shouldn't just wait on Congress. We should also think about state courts. We should also think about administrative regulations. Okay, now last year, the Supreme Court declined to listen to a case of a man who was arrested for allegedly making fun of an Ohio police department on Facebook. Now, the jokester was acquitted after trial, but was blocked from suing because of qualified immunity. I want y'all to pay attention. Now, in recent years, states such as New Mexico and Colorado passed legislation to amend qualified immunity on the local level of government officials or for government officials and peace officers, respectively, who were found by their employer to have violated an individual's constitutional rights. Now, with these reforms, families and victims of police violence can file a lawsuit in state court when they don't have to go through the legal hoops qualified immunity causes if a federal lawsuit is filed. Well, here's the thing. They also need to do something about police harassment and retaliation, okay? Because when some of these people go out here and file lawsuits or record something that the police did nefariously, and then they, turn it in, it makes the media or it goes viral and everybody finds out and sees what they're really doing, then those people sometimes suffer the consequences, okay, through retaliatory measures enacted by the police themselves. Okay, let us not forget with the case of Eric Garner up there in New York, the young man who video recorded that, and then the police were harassing him, allegedly, according to him and his mother, okay, just bursting into their house. And then that young man ended up serving 4 years in prison, okay? Unlikely, in my opinion, trumped up charges, okay? So they need to do something about all of this. I mean, this whole system needs to be dismantled and then put back together, okay? And this time in a way that, I'm not going to say the right way, because to some people, this is the right way. Okay, because it targets the people that they want to target. And that would be disproportionately people who look like me, people of a darker hue, but also poor people who can't afford high-powered defense attorneys. Okay. So the Colorado law narrowly passed the buck to the officer. The officer has to pay 5% or $25,000 of the settlement amount if their employer found that their actions were not in good faith but were illegal. If the officer can't pay, then their employer will pay the officer's portion of the settlement. The New Mexico law allows people to sue police officers and other government officials without the need of a precedent case, which is at the root of qualified immunity. So that's why they're able to get away with this. Okay, that's why they're able to get away with this. Now, Carbado says that all the tools in the toolbox need to be used because this is a pressing public problem that goes to the core of our democracy. So I don't think we should leave any stone unturned. Well, I absolutely agree. Okay, this is all nefarious and it's all a load of BS. And at the end of the day, something definitely needs to be done. Okay, I don't know how much longer people are going to want to continue to put up with the BS. Okay. There is no justice in this corrupt, nefarious system when people are brutalized by these nefarious officers. They very often get away with it. And like I said, even if they get any consequence, oftentimes it's just a simple slap on the wrist. Okay. And that all needs to stop. Okay. The police, in my opinion, should be held to a higher standard than us regular citizens because they've taken an oath. Okay. They've taken an oath to uphold the law. That's what they have taken an oath to do. So why aren't they being forced to do it? Okay, prayers and condolences to the family of Robert Brooks, who was beaten, pummeled, tortured, choked, stomped, kicked, and all of the above while his hands were cuffed behind his back. This man was a son. He was a father. He could have been someone's brother, uncle, but he had people who loved and cared about him, and he did not deserve that. And no matter what reason he was in prison for, as a human being on this earth, he still had rights. Okay, you don't just get to take away every right that someone has and treat them like trash because they're in prison. But that's what a lot of these guards and these police officers seem to do. And the other people who are the higher ups and who are in charge of running things, well, they often just turn a blind eye. And in fact, sometimes they're actually in on it. Okay, so something clearly needs to be done at the end of the day. So with that all being said, everyone please like and share this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Okay. Each one teach one. That's how we grow and thrive. Do something productive, constructive, but never destructive. And always remember, beloveds, to keep the Most High first in your lives. Also, don't forget to keep your notifications on because I absolutely will be going live later on today. Okay, so until next time, beloveds.